Okay, I played a really good game of chess here. This is, I faced an attack called the Paleface Attack. All my years of studying chess, I've never heard of this. So that was, pretty interesting game here. Let me put this in analysis mode um, so we can see what the computer thinks of it. I have to jump ahead to the end of the game. I'll try to watch the board. Bam, bam. Okay, so here we are. We're at the beginning of the game. I'm black. The other guy's white. And again, this is the Paleface Attack. Caught me totally by surprise. I'd never seen it, and then when the game was over, I was like, "What the hell is that?" I looked it up. It's called the Paleface Attack. But so pretty good game here. I'll cut right to the chase. Pawn to queen 4. Nothing special. I'm black. Knight to f6. That's usually the way that I answer. Pawn to queen 4. Not always, but it's pretty flexible. You can go into a King's Indian or a Nimzo Indian or a lot of other defenses, but that's not the point here. d4, knight to f6. And here it is. What the heck is that? F3. F3. Who's ever seen that move? I don't know what the heck that was. So that's it. That's the indicator of the Paleface Attack. Um, make a quick drawing. So this looks kind of weird. All right. Nobody ever moves this, but now this pawn is going to support this square, and it's going to enable white to make this move. Right, pawn to king 4. So once he moves his pawn up here, now he's going to have a pawn here, here, and here, and that's going to give white a pretty big center. So it's pretty impressive. It looks awkward. If you know anything about chess, sometimes you can get your queen to come along this diagonal, and it can lead to some fast checkmates over here, but as you can see, the queen is not ready to go anywhere. There's two pieces in its way. So, this is going to allow white to build this big pawn center here. And it's pretty impressive, I got to admit. All right, so f3, that's the Paleface Attack. I don't know where it got its name. I'll have to do some more research on it. So, I just continue with kind of a flexible defense there. That it's a second move in a King's Indian defense just kind of leaves you a lot of flexibility. You can still do a lot of things here. So g6, nothing unusual. There's e4. That's the move I was talking about. Now, had white not played his second move with this f3 with that pawn, then of course I would just be able to take the pawn that he just moved and play knight captures pawn. But with his Paleface Attack here, now he's got a pretty big center. I got no pawns in the center, so this is pretty good. So d6 for me, that what that does is it prevents this d6 move is it prevents the advance of this pawn, which could kick my knight. So now if he advances this pawn, I could take it if I want to. And of course also it opens up the scope of this light squared bishop. So that's the purpose of that move. Again, here's this big, pawn center. I'm looking to put my bishop right here so I can have some control of these dark squares here in the center. So on we go. Bishop to whatever that is, g5. Threatening to take my knight. If he takes that knight, then if he takes this knight, then at the moment the only way I can recapture it is with this pawn, and then that's going to cause me to have doubled pawns, which really isn't too bad this early in the game, but nonetheless doubled pawns are kind of a weakness for a whole bunch of other reasons that I don't have time to go into. But if this pawn were over here, now I can't move this pawn until I get this guy out of the way. It also takes one of my central pawns away, and then white's got his big center, and I'm going to have no pawn here, and just one pawn here. So I can understand why he would want to do this move. So not a bad move. Bishop to g5. My turn. Bishop to g7. So now I'm covered. I'm continuing to develop my bishop. And also if he takes my knight, then I won't have doubled pawns. He does take the knight, and I take with the bishop. That way I haven't doubled my pawns. It's his turn. C3. Again, a nice impressive center that, reinforces his pawn there in the middle, so I don't take it with my bishop. Obviously, if I did, he could take with his queen, but he probably doesn't want to spend the rest of the game with his queen tied down to the defense of that pawn. So C3 is pretty good. My move, I want to get this bishop back where it belongs. Let's get another diagram going here. When the bishop's sitting here, it's also in danger of this move. Pawn comes forward, and then, of course, I either have to move the bishop backwards, or I could take it, but then he's going to retake, and I don't like the looks of that. Now the queens are looking at each other, and I don't know. I just didn't like that. So, back here is where I want my bishop, so I just moved it back here to avoid all that problems, right? So bishop to G. Let's see, it's back up, right? Where are we at here? There's C3. Okay, so I back my bishop up because I don't want, to just give him a free move in the center. I'm going to back it up anyway. Knight to E2. He's trying to develop his knight. No problem there. I castle kingside. Pretty flexible setup by me. I got a decent looking amount of development going on. H4 by him. I don't know. That looks a little premature to me. He's starting to run down the board and trying to crack open this king's rook file, which I understand, but he's got a lot of guys back here on the back of his army that haven't even moved yet. Alright, so knight to D7 by me. This move is pretty flexible. Alright, it develops my knight, and it also allows me to prepare. Do I want to move this pawn 2 squares forward and challenge the white center, right? Because now the knight protects it. Or I could move this pawn 2 squares forward and challenge the white center, and the knight protects it, and also the bishop protects it. So pretty flexible move there. Knight BD7. It gives you kind of a cramped position, but I'm black here, so I kind of have to wait for white to. I got to equalize before I can start to attack, but that's a whole other story. So here comes this pawn again, H5. Again, this is a little overly ambitious, if you ask me. It's not a bad plan, but he really doesn't have anybody to support it. So I don't mind that. I'm thinking to myself, like I said, he's running down here a little too soon. He's got all these guys back here that aren't really ready for battle. He's got a real impressive center here, I got to admit, but the whole rest of his army isn't really ready to do anything. What he's trying to do is open up this file right here, and then his rook, is really aiming at my king, and a lot of dangerous stuff can happen there, especially if he can manage to get his queen over here. You get this file opened up, and you manage to get the queen over in this direction, and now you got the queen and the rook, and bam, the queen comes down here, and unfortunately I've lost a lot of games like that. But I'm not too worried about this one, because if he takes, I'm going to take back with this pawn, and then this is opening up an avenue for me. So I'm not too worried about it. I'm kind of continuing with my development, especially because I think that's an advantage. He's terribly underdeveloped here. Alright, so it's my turn. Whoops. So it's my turn. C5. Now I'm trying to attack the black's control of the center. This is a hyper modern type of opening where you're attacking the center from the side. So that's my plan. It starts to open my game up. H captures G6. Like I said, he's trying to open this line up. No problem there. I recaptured just like I said I would. Queen to C2. I'm not sure what his game plan is there. He's probably looking to get the, like I talked about, kind of, he's probably thinking of something along this lines, maybe pushing this pawn forward and maybe pushing this pawn forward. It's hard to say what he was thinking. It's not a bad move. My move. So, I'm going to take advantage. Anytime I have a chance to use a side pawn to take a center pawn, I tend to do it quite often. And plus, this is going to open up some avenues for me. So, pawn captures pawn. Queen to B3 check. I suppose we could have played that last time. I don't know. So queen to B3 check. No big deal there. I'm just going to, I saw that coming. I'm just going to move my king out of the way. Not a problem. All right. And remember, excuse me, earlier in the game, black gave up. See, I got a dark squared bishop. White gave up his dark squared bishop. Remember, he captured my knight right here. So, you know, I'm thinking to myself, so long as I keep this king on dark squares, you know, that's a little bit safer because there's no bishop that's going to attack those squares. So, you know, I was happy to kind of just tuck my king over here. I saw this check coming, and I thought, no problem, I'll just move out of the way and kind of hide behind this bishop. So this works out pretty well. All right, so king to h8, c captures d4, white recaptures, and still got a pretty good looking center. Still looks a little underdeveloped. You know, things are starting to look a little better for me here. I'm starting to like the looks of things. b6. The reason for this move is pretty simple. I want to get this guy into play, okay? But so let's say I move this knight out of the way, and as soon as I move the bishop, then this pawn becomes weak, right? The bishop's protecting that pawn, so you know, what I want to do is kind of get this pawn up here so it's connected to this one, and then I'm free to move my bishop maybe this way or maybe even this way. So that's the reason for this move. Alright, so c captures d4, b6. Alright, now the pawn's a little bit more protected, and I start to have some flexibility with the bishop. Where are we at? Let's keep doing it. Queen to d5. If you look down here to the right of the queen on this white diagonal, the queen is threatening to take the rook. And I found kind of an interesting way to, well, I just like this diagram thing. So, you know, with this move, the queen is now threatening to take that rook. That's kind of sneaky. You know, you would think that rook's protected, but if you take a look, it really isn't. So I find kind of an interesting way. I mean, I'm sure I didn't invent this, but I find a nice way to defend against that. I'm going to move my white bishop out to here. And then, you know, when this guy moves here, now the queen will protect the rook. And also, the bishop is on a pretty good looking diagonal here, kind of bearing down on these guys. And that's what happens. So bishop to a6, kind of an awkward looking place for the bishop, but actually a pretty effective place. Alright, knight to g3. That exposes his bishop to my bishop, right? If you look, my bishop's not protected, so by moving his knight, now he can play bishop captures bishop, or you know, I could play bishop captures bishop, but I didn't really like the looks of that. That's just going to kind of help him get his rook into play. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't want to do that, so what I do? Knight to f6. So I threaten his queen, right? He's not going to take my bishop if I'm threatening his queen, so he has to move his queen out of the way. And then when he does, I put my bishop back where I want it. That's really where I want my bishop. Now it's protected, and it begins to influence the center of the board and tear apart the white center. All right, so d5, white pushes forward, kind of puts a cramp on my bishop there. You know, I'm kind of cramped up. I definitely don't have a lot of space. This knight, now the knight's out of the way, he exposes that. Now if you look at my dark squared bishop on the left here, he's kind of starting to look down this long diagonal, and my plan is to bounce this knight. You know, I want to put the knight right here and threaten the queen. That's my plan. And like I said, now the bishop is beginning to start to look at this pawn here, right? Because once the queen moves out of the way, now the queen's the only thing guarding this pawn. So now maybe the bishop will get a chance to take that, and my knight's up here in a more influential square and starting to influence the center. Alright, so he threatens to take my knight. That doesn't really worry me because I'm getting ready to move it. Now I threaten the queen, and he has to move. He's still protecting his pawn back there, but nonetheless I got the queen on the move. Rook to c8. The purpose of that move, as you can see, is now it's lined up with the queen. So what I'd like to do on my next move is move my knight out of the way and maybe take a pawn or something and expose the queen to an attack where the queen's going to have to move. So it's like a discovered attack. It's pretty sneaky. He sees that coming and develops a piece, puts his knight in the way. I push a pawn forward because I want to kick this bishop out. This bishop's kind of in my side of the board, so I'm trying to kick this bishop out of the way. That doesn't doesn't really work. He just kind of plants it right there. But I don't mind that, because after this exchange, I'm going to gain a pawn. Bishop captures bishop, pawn captures bishop, rook captures pawn. So, you know, I kind of made out in that situation. Alright, so white castles. I don't mind that, because now I'm really starting to look at a move like this, because now I got a check here, and you know, things are open over here. You know, white had that strong pawn center in the beginning, you know, but the pawn center is starting to wear down, and we got a lot of weaknesses going on around the black king, or the white king, excuse me. You notice this guy right here is completely unprotected. I got a queen that can maybe bounce into here and start to attack, and you know, things are looking up. I'm hanging in there against the Paleface Attack. All right, so knight to e6. I'm trying to redirect this knight. I think I want to bounce him up here to the left and put it on whatever that is. F4 is my plan, I believe. So queen to b3. You know, my knight at the moment isn't protected, so the queen is threatened to take my knight. I'm not too worried about that. Was that where I was a second ago? No. Alright, so queen to b3, so, you know, I threaten his queen again. Queen to d1, kind of keeping him at bay. This was an awkward looking move, but the point of it is to keep his knight from... The point of this move is now his knight can't come in here. You know, he wants to put his knight right here, and then it's going to be causing me a lot of problems. But by moving my pawn forward, even though that looks like an awkward move, it keeps that knight away from me. It also kind of opens up an avenue for my queen here if I want to use that. So that looked kind of funny on the board, but it's later in the game, and you know, it seemed like a really useful move, and I thought about it for a minute and I did it. Alright, so f4, you know, maybe white, I don't know, he plans on, you know, charging down the board, but I think he's opening himself up to some attack here. Yeah, this was pretty sweet. Look at this queen move. This knight over here isn't protected. Alright, so I bounced my queen over there, and now black's got to do something. Alright, and it's also also a little bit of a double threat here by moving my queen up here. Now the knight has to move out of the way or something, so maybe if the knight moves anyway. You also got the threat of the rook capturing this pawn, because now the rook is protected by the queen, so I'm looking to maybe win another pawn there. Alright, so he protects it by bouncing his knight back. I'm not too worried about that, because I'm going to take that guy out. And now the knight has to go away. I can't really catch for this pawn that I talked about, because now his knight protects it, but I'm starting to like this position. This move, the reason for this move is going to become apparent here in just a second. Yeah, that's it. By making this move, I do a couple things. I'd like to take this pawn, and a lot of times when you do that, then the other guy slides his rook over, and you have to move your piece back. And when he does, he just comes right down here and attacks. You know, he takes your pawn too, so I don't like that idea. Also, by moving this pawn forward, I create the ability to do, you know, bounce my queen from here to here and create a check up here. So I won't go too far into that. We'll just take a look at it. I move that pawn, he moves his rook, and my queen comes back, because I didn't want my queen. See, he moved his rook up there, and he was going to threaten my queen, right? He was going to, you know, by moving his rook up here, when my queen was right here, his next move, he could have put his rook here, and then I got to move my queen, and then there's a rook, and my pawn, and my king. So I really wasn't liking this whole ordeal. So I got my queen out of dodge there. Alright, my move. Alright, there's the rook move I was talking about. Alright, and there's bishop captures pawn. Alright, now he puts the rook right behind it. That's pretty normal. Now I got to move my bishop. I move it right back where it was. I really like it right there in that corner, guarding the king. He pushes his pawn forward. I don't really want to exchange that, because if I play pawn captures pawn, then he can play queen captures queen. I really don't want my queen off the board yet, so bam, queen to b6. This is kind of an intermezzo move, kind of an in-between move. Alright, so he's got to move, and now I don't mind capturing the pawn. Alright, I don't really know what he's thinking here, but he forces the exchange of rooks. I don't mind that. I go ahead and keep pushing towards his king. He takes my rook. I'm okay with that. Queen captures rook. Alright, he threatens my queen. I just put it right back in there, tucked in there behind the little pawn wall. Knight to c3. I don't know, maybe trying to put his knight back in the center. I don't know what his game plan is. Maybe he wants me to take it. I don't really want to swap this real strong bishop for that knight. You know, it's a real strong bishop and kind of a weak knight. So I'm going to hang on to my bishop, and I'm pushing this pawn forward. Alright, and I also just you know, I just moved this pawn off of this square, moved it forward, and by doing that, I have now opened this line of attack up, right? Bishop, put your bishop up here, and, you know, now, you know, bishop up here is now a checking move, or the queen could go here and play check, you know, so by pushing that pawn, A, it's really getting the pawn right down there in his side of the board, and B, it opens up some checking possibilities. So let's back up, right? So pawn, and he captures a pawn, and check. And, you know, there's just nobody there to guard the white king. Alright, so it's my move. I really got a good setup here, and boom. You know, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Because if he doesn't pay attention, all I have to do is play my queen right here, and it's game over. You can see up here in the corner that the computer says there's a mate in 3. I really haven't been looking at much of the analysis yet, but I don't think I win the game in 3 moves, so I must have missed a mate. Alright, so my last move, boom, put the queen up there. He has to defend against that, which he does. Now rook captures pawn, check, and he's really running out of options. You know, he's kind of got to give up his queen there. Check. You know, I would almost say the game's pretty much over here. I could do a lot of things, but, you know, I just get in a lot of trouble. You think you got a game 1, and then one of these knights makes a sneaky move or something like that. And I just thought, you know what, let's keep it simple. It looks up here in the corner like I missed a mate in 1. But my plan was, you know what, let's just take out all of his guys, and so I don't have nothing to worry about. Check. Alright, check. And now he's out of people. You know, the game's over here. I mean, I'll play through it real quick. I, you know, keep my queen here so that he just has to kind of keep backing up. And little by little, just a simple, effective plan. Check. I'm just going to get another queen, you know, and then it's over. But it's already been a pretty long video, so I won't go much more into it. But really nice game there, and like I said, I just never had faced this Paleface Attack before. I was kind of impressed with that victory.